So basically, FANOS, 5 letters, FANOS. Each one of them stands for something. So F is for feelings, A is for affirmation, N is for needs, O is for ownership, and S is either for sobriety or spirituality. And my understanding, and the way it was taught to Beth and I, was that it was intended to just be a brief check-in. One of the interesting things is sometimes what bogs a couple down is they've not thought about it till they get there, and that slows them down. But in the perfect world, the couple will have already thought of each of those letters on their own. And so when they come to this conversation, it can be fairly quick because there's not a lot of reflection. I'm just sharing what I'm already aware of.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, and we are here today with our usual host, Greg Miller. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing well.
Well, Greg, this time we tapped into the Faithful and True staff and came up with a husband and wife team.
And as you sports people say, we have a deep bench here at Faithful and
We
True.
have a deep bench. We went right to the stars. we went right to the stars today with Russ and Susie Smidt from staff here at Faithful and True. Both Russ and Susie are, well, the best word is they're kind of the counselors for all seasons, because they counsel the men and the women individually. They counsel couples together. Easy for me to say. And also, yes, exactly. What am I drinking today? And Russ counsels men's groups, and Susie couples women's groups. So they are the jack of all trades. And welcome. We're glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. It's great to be here.
And they are also perfectly suited for this topic because today we're going to be talking about FANOS. And one of the great things about y'all's story is y'all came through Faithful and True. So you were introduced to FANOS as a couple that used it as clients. Mm-hmm. And now on the other end, as you work with couples, you have the opportunity to teach them. So maybe a great place to start would be your own history about how it was for you to use FANOS. And then in a little bit, we're going to talk about the history itself of FANOS and what exactly it's intended to be.
Actually, when it was introduced to us, it was FAN.
Okay.
That's how long you've been here.
It's been a long time. A long
It
time.
was feelings, affirmations, and needs. And I remember sitting down one session saying how hard the feelings were. And then the affirmations, and actually the needs too.
Yeah.
I guess all three of them.
Yes,
really
they were all hard.
Yeah.
at first.
Yeah.
Which says it's not an easy thing. It was a new way of talking, really, for us.
Well, I think part of it is it's kind of like learning a new language. For most of us that engage the journey of recovery, one of the things that we're struggling with is self-awareness, where we're able to identify what's going on with ourselves and then be able to communicate it to somebody else. And that kind of the role of FANOS, it's like a beginning vocabulary tool as you're practicing this new language that you can begin to speak it to, in this case, to your spouse and share what you're becoming aware of that you can share with your spouse.
Absolutely. We grew up talking all the time in our family, but I don't remember any feeling words being used. I don't really recall that. And so to actually try and come up with a feeling, number one, you had to have a list. And we have one on the wall in our group room just to help us. But yeah, just to be able to know the feeling words did feel literally like a new language, a new word language. And I think the other interesting thing is I figured out the feelings in my head before I felt them. Mm-hmm. I kind of was able to identify the feeling without really feeling it all that much.
And I think that's an incredibly common experience where as we're being educated about them, as we become aware of them, as we observe them in other people, then many times before we have access to them, we can name them or label them. Mm-hmm. And I often tell men, it's not just enough to identify them, you have to experience them and express them. That's kind of what moves us forward. But, we've kind of gotten into this, but FANOS is a tool that is used for couples to check in with each other. And part of what it's supposed to be is brief. That we see it as it's simple tool. It may not be simple to use because you're having to learn this new language,
Right.
but the idea is it was set up by Mark and Deb to be simple in its use so that couples would be more likely to do it. The more complicated something becomes, the more resistant we are to it. And so one of the ways that you can know that you're using FANOS well is there is a simplicity to it. If you're starting to experience a lot of complexity, you may have gotten a little bit off the path of what FANOS was intended to be. So you kind of mentioned the history that when y'all started, it was FAN. And
Yeah.
as you've talked to Deb and are more aware of it, how did the other letters and what was kind of the progression going forward?
Well, at some point, it was Mark and Debbie who decided ownership was something that doesn't come naturally, probably to any of us as humans. And then it became this check-in about sobriety. The idea that I think as we sat in groups, a husband might think, the one struggling with the addiction, we'll call the husband here, might think, oh, I don't want to talk about my sobriety. Maybe she's having a good day and she's not thinking about that. And so why wreck a good day?
Right.
When actually she was thinking about it all the time. And what she needed was him to offer that to her rather than her to have to figure out countless ways to ask for it.
Right.
And so that I think is really a key part.
Yeah. I also think that on the other end of the pendulum are those guys who are confident in their sobriety and they assume their wife is confident in their sobriety and they're not struggling, they're doing well. And so they're assuming that the wife is assuming that they're doing well. And one of the ways that I would understand the S is that it is a confirmation of sobriety. It really isn't checking in around sobriety because the way that we talk about it is if I'm not sober, I don't use FANOS to do that.
Right.
But if I am sober, I'm just confirming that. And that's probably one of the things that the spouse is needing to hear. And maybe she is assuming, that he is sober. She sees that he's in programs and doing what he's supposed to be doing. But it's great to have that confirmation each time there's a check-in that, yes, I am sober. So we've kind of done all the letters. So people who are not familiar with FANOS may just need an introduction. So basically, FANOS, 5 letters, FANOS. Each one of them stands for something. So F is for feelings, A is for affirmation, N is for needs, O is for ownership, and S is either for sobriety or spirituality. And my understanding and the way it was taught to Beth and I was that it was intended to just be a brief check-in, that I come aware of it. One of the interesting things is sometimes what bogs a couple down is they've not thought about it till they get there, and that slows them down. But in the perfect world, the couple will have already thought of each of those letters on their own. And so when they come to this conversation, it can be fairly quick because there's not a lot of reflection. I'm just sharing what I'm already aware of.
The simplicity and the difficulty are an interesting combination with FANOS.
Right.
Because it is a real simple structure, and yet I couldn't do FAN or FANOS off the top of my head
Right.
at first. It wasn't something that I could just come up with.
Right.
And so I practiced it in my journaling, whatever time I did that in the day, and I kind of prepared, like, how am I feeling right now? What is something I affirm myself for?
Right.
What do I need today? What can I own? And then how is my thing that I've chosen at whatever time for spiritual growth?
Right.
How do I feel I'm doing on that.
Yeah.
And it was a practice individually for me so that I could do it with Russ.
Right. Well, and I would even say, Susie, you're not alone in that. I
Yeah.
don't think you're kind of the unique person that
No,
struggles
I don't
with it.
think so either.
I think, and I love that idea that there was intentionality before you and Russ got together, that
Yeah.
you spent time thinking about it or journaling it, whatever that practice is for a person to become more self-aware. Because if I wait until that last minute to the kind of agreed upon time that we're doing FANOS, then I'm trying to figure out, and I may not be present with myself in a way to be able to articulate it. But to take time beforehand to check, it's kind of like before I can check in with anybody else, I have to check in with myself first.
Yeah.
I think one of the things, you were talking about reflecting. One of the things we know about how the brain works is the more you're measuring something or the more you're becoming aware of something, the more you become aware of it, the more things you notice. And so if you know you have a FANOS you're going to get to, you start, noticing, I could, that would be a good affirmation, or, that would be a good thing I could own. One of the things that at one point we had to talk about is I didn't like it that Susie would save up the affirmations.
I wasn't sure I could remember one later.
Feel free to share those when you have them.
It's okay to do more than one affirmation a day. But I do think it was certainly true for me. I started to be aware of how little I owned.
Right.
And it was easier for me to think of affirmations, but
Yeah.
the owning was hard.
And I think part of what you become aware of, and you've already alluded to this, is growing up, if my family didn't regularly talk about feelings, if I didn't hear people acknowledge, wow, I'm really angry today, or I feel sad today, then I'm not learning that language growing up. If I don't hear my family regularly affirm each other, if I don't hear people own their stuff. I often heard Mark and Deb talk about one of the indications of ownership is people apologizing. So did you grow up in a family where people apologize? And so the more foreign this language is to you, the more intentionally you have to be in learning it. It's kind of like if you're learning Spanish or French for the first time, they send you to that learning lab where you listen to it over and over again. And, that's, I think, part of what we do is when we're in a community and we listen to other people affirm and express their feelings and own, we're being exposed to that language. One of the ways that you get conversational is you listen to other people speaking it. But I just want to validate for those of you that may be new to recovery and are struggling with this language, that makes perfect sense. And you're going to become more aware of how this wasn't something fluently spoken in your home growing up. I also want to validate for those of you that have been in recovery for a while and you're still struggling with these things, there's no shame in that. Some of these, it just takes a lot of effort. I think needs is one of them. I have men that I've been working with for years, and it can also be true for me. Somebody will say, well, what do you need or what would be helpful? And I'm stumped in that moment. And so just because we've been speaking it for a while, there's still some vocabulary that can be challenging for us.
Yeah, let's start at the top for the challenges, because I think feelings are definitely one of them. It's really tempting to try and explain feelings. And when we're doing FANOS, I usually tell people use the words, don't go rogue and create your own acronym. Say I'm feeling this. And we want single words.
Right.
And it's really tempting to say, I'm angry because, and go into this long explanation. As soon as you start explaining your feelings, you're no longer having the feeling.
Right.
The other part is we want to know what you're feeling right at that moment, and that's to practice. That's to practice to become aware of your body and what it's telling you, and to be able to recognize what you're feeling. And initially, most of us, I think, when we're not used to feeling, we only recognize the feeling when it's really powerful, when it's really strong. So we only recognize anger when we're really angry or when we're really sad. And part of what we're trying to do is identify those earlier, more gentle feelings so that we can do something about it sooner than wait until we're in a rage.
Yeah, and one thing about feelings I think is important is rarely are we feeling just one thing. So if you're expressing your feelings, there's going to be more than one word. But one of the things to pay attention to is many times we start with "I'm feeling that," and then we actually do a statement.
Or like,
Yeah,
feeling like.
and so I'm feeling that you're distant. Well, that's not really a feeling. That's more of an observation. And one of the things that we're wanting to grow in are what are my observations, what are my perspectives, what are my core beliefs. And so the information I'm sharing is actually helpful information for me to pay attention to. It's just not a feeling. And one of the ways you can know that you're sharing a feeling is that it's one word that needs no explanation. I also encourage couples when they're using this feelings word, it's okay, especially, let's say earlier in the day, or most of the day I felt anxious. But now that I'm home, I'm feeling a bit calmer. To be able to say, right now I'm feeling calm, because I think that's a great encouragement that part of what we're practicing is getting present with ourselves in the moment, but we're also wanting to connect with our spouse for them to know a little bit more about our day or what's going on with us. So it's okay to also say, I spent most of the day feeling anxious, and right now I'm feeling calm. So that I'm including them in more of what's going on in my day, not just in this moment.
Yeah, one of the things we run into a lot of times, with the men is they'll say, I feel normal. And I think what they mean by that, and certainly what I experienced, is normal is the absence of recognizing any feelings.
Right.
You know, so this feels normal to me. I don't have any feelings I recognize. And so normal is not a feeling.
Right. It could be if I replace normal with numb.
You could be. Yeah.
So I could say I'm feeling numb, meaning I'm disconnected from my feelings, which isn't necessarily a feeling, but it is an accurate awareness, or it's an indication of my relationship to my feelings in that moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys recognize, if it's brought to their attention, that when you're feeling "quote unquote" normal, you're actually recognizing a problem. That normal for you is the inability to connect with yourself, and so to try and identify these feelings is really important. You used a feelings list, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. One of the things I want to say about feelings, add to that, we don't want to describe feelings into long sentences. However, if you're coming to the table and you're saying, I'm angry, and all, a lot of strong, hard kind of emotions, those might be directed towards your spouse. And if they're not, it'd be okay to say these aren't about you.
Right.
That I'm angry right now, I'm disappointed, I'm all these harder emotions, and it's not about anything you did.
Right.
It allows, I think, the spouse to listen differently to the rest of the FANOS.
Yeah, and I think that's accurate, actually very helpful, because we are listening through the lens of how does this affect me? And especially in the early days of recovery where there can be pretty intense and explosive emotions, sometimes it's okay to say, I'm angry and I'm angry at you. And that's all. I don't have to explain why. I don't have to get into the detail. And there's everything in us that either as the speaker wants to get into the details and remind the person why we're angry at them, or if I'm the person listening, I might want clarity why they're angry in order to try to create some sort of sense of safety. I think another, kind of back to this idea of saying, I feel normal, a lot of people say, I feel good. And it's helpful to unpack what good is. And one of the words I offer to a man when he says he feels good is content. And it's amazing to me how many men come through Faithful and True and they've never really felt content before. And so that's actually a brand new emotion for them. But what they're used to saying is, I feel good. But the reality is, if we dig a little bit deeper, it may be, I feel content, I feel satisfied, or maybe I feel hopeful. And so the role of FANOS is not to interrogate our spouse to get clarity about what they're feeling. And as the person sharing my feelings, it is important that I've thought through it and I'm actually sharing a feeling, not just an adjective or an adverb.
Yeah, I think they're... Oh, go ahead.
Which is why the list is so helpful. To have a feeling list in front of you. I find it's helpful for most people.
Right.
We have it on the wall in the room here, to read through them, and what fits for me right now. With practice, you don't need the list as much. But
Right.
at first, really do.
I've had a lot of guys that go through the list and figure out what they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they figure out what they are.
What they
Right.
are, yeah.
And I think there is a transition. I think the feeling good thing's interesting because for me, feeling good was that my anxiety was low.
Right.
So it wasn't that I'd reach contentment, but it felt good because my anxiety was only at a 8.5 instead of a 10.5.
Right.
And so I think there can be a transition that way. I think, the other thing about feelings, I always like to think of them, or it helped me to think of them as a gift to Susie.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she shared a feeling with me, it was a gift to me because it really is an act of vulnerability to share what's going on inside you. And when we talk about transparency, a lot of times we talk about truth telling and things like that. But part of transparency is letting your inner life out
Mm-hmm.
and being willing to let somebody else see what that is. And even though, this is the IKEA of tools, because it's simple.
Oh, I
That's
see.
why I
I was
said
trying to
that.
figure
Yeah.
that
Takes
out.
you forever to
Because
put it together.
It's simple. Yeah. It looks simple, but
They
it's
sell
hard.
it as simple,
Yeah,
but
that's right.
it's
hard
very
to assemble.
complex.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is really profound that you make a practice every day of letting your guard down and saying, this is what's going on inside me. And it looks like, big deal, I'm feeling whatever. But I think if you look at it from the perspective that I'm letting my guard down and letting you in to see me, and I want to do the same for you, I want to understand you and know what's going on with you, I think the feeling part is a really profound way to start it.
I
Right.
think that part of it becomes more meaningful as time goes along. At the beginning, vulnerability was small.
Yeah. Well, and
so-
when you also say at the beginning, safety was limited too.
Right,
So
right.
there is a direct correlation between how safe I perceive myself and how vulnerable I'm willing to be.
Right.
And what's interesting is, that safety fluctuates. One day we're feeling safer, and so there's a greater sense of vulnerability and
Right.
openness. But the next day we try to do this, and suddenly something happened, and the guards are up. We don't feel safe, and so there's limited vulnerability. And so I think part of it is even acknowledging that's going to change from day to day based upon what's going on. We're talking about the complexity. So we talked about the complexity of feelings. What might be the complexity of affirmation?
If you can't think of one.
Well,
let's just acknowledge that sometimes, especially early on, you have to skip a letter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
sometimes, you just really can't come up with anything.
well, I smile because I had a connection in my brain that if I affirmed Russ for anything, if I said anything encouraging, he'd think we were all fine.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he wouldn't have to do the work, and we'd be all good to go. And so I was really hesitant to be affirming.
Right.
Even if I felt things, or when I did think of things. And Debbie, we all know her gentleness in
Mhm.
group, challenged me. Is that really the person you desire to be? Stingy with affirmation. And I had to honestly answer no to
Right.
that. And so it was a challenge, and it was an exercise in risk, some level of risk, to be affirming.
Right. And I think,
I can be in
again,
pain, and I can still be affirming.
and I can affirm, and that doesn't mean we're done. I can affirm, and there's more work to be done. I would say in the work that I've done with couples, there is a common theme, especially early on, that there is this fear. Wives can see that things are going well. Wives can benefit from the work that husbands are doing, and there is a reluctance to share it because their intuition is telling them that their husband's motivation is still attached to their response. Mm-hmm. So if you want the freedom to, for your wife to affirm you, you are clearly motivated by something other than her approval. Once your wife knows that no matter what, you're committed to recovery and transformation, then you're going to continue to recover, and you're going to continue to choose transformation, whether she's affirming you or not, whether she's having a good day or a bad day. But my sense is if a wife perceives that the husband's recovery is still attached to her reaction, she's going to be tempted to withhold any type of affirmation to kind of keep you motivated. And that's not healthy for either one of you.
Well, yeah, the A is not approval.
Right.
Right. The A is an affirmation. And I do think that it says more about the person giving the affirmation than the other way around. You know, it's something, I notice this about you. I'm choosing to be, this is the kind of person I'm choosing to be, an affirming person. Mm-hmm. And I'm willing to do that, but it's not a grade.
Yeah.
It could feel like one, but it's not.
One thing, too, that I would say about this affirmation piece, what we talk about, is it's also important that it is specific. Mm-hmm. We can be generalized in this, and so part of the complexity is to take it from something very generalized and then to share something more specific that you can affirm. And it doesn't have to be big. It can be something that might be seen as minutia or small. But if it really is something that you affirm and appreciate, and another way that we talk about is something that you're grateful for, that you appreciate in the other person, and your willingness to share that.
In early days, it was easier to affirm something Russ had done. You know, he had played with the kids, or he had remembered something, or he had some action that he had done. Mm-hmm. And then it became easier and easier to affirm parts of who his character was as he worked longer on recovery and as my pain healed more, that I was able to become more vulnerable because the safety was building.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Randy.
I was going to say, as we're running out of time on this podcast, it's obvious that this subject deserves for us to have further discussion, as in a FANOS Part 2 podcast that we'd like to invite you both to join us for that as well. And so is there a closing statement you'd like to wrap up this first FANOS podcast with?
Yeah, what I would say is to just remind people that FANOS is meant to be simple. It's meant to be brief. It is a check-in, not a conversation starter. Mm-hmm. And the more we try to expand it, the less effective it becomes and the less likely we are to use it. So join us for the next podcast as we continue the conversation. But we really do see the benefit when couples choose to take the time to do FANOS. A significant difference can be made in their relationship. And especially, another quickie, the more boundaries you have in the relationship, the more important it is that you have structured check-in to kind of navigate the chaotic seasons.
Mm-hmm. Well, Russ and Susie, thank you so much for joining us today for FANOS Part 1. And Greg, as always, thank you for your leadership in this.
And thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's an open invitation.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I thought about doing this on my own with no guests, and it just was missing.
The vision was kind of blurred.
It was missing something. I don't know what it is. But we'd like to thank Kayla. Kayla has been our engineer for today and has run the program flawlessly, of course. We'd like to invite you to visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources available to you. We have over 550 of these podcasts now. I've been saying 400 forever, and we looked into it, and it's actually like 565. Today's 566. So we'd like to thank you for your loyalty in watching and listening to these podcasts. We also want to invite you that if hearing these podcasts has opened your eyes to some help that you are looking for, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources. Plus, you'll find all of the information on our website about the 3-day intensive workshops that we offer every month for the Men's Journey Workshop, and then about 3 times a year for the Women's Journey Workshop and the Couples Journey Workshop. And those are powerful events that we'd like to invite you to look into. So until we join you next time, we'd like to thank you and hope that this coming week for you will be filled with many blessings and with great vision.